You lecture me so much, so you must be pretty competent, right? You high school dropout. Let's see you handle this call. They're French, by the way.
The words hung in the air of our modern office space, sharp and cutting. I had retired and been rehired as a part-time employee, but I never expected to face such blatant disrespect. Will, a new hire who constantly boasted about his Harvard degree, stood before me with a smirk that spoke volumes about his perceived superiority. Now he was trying to force me into handling a French business negotiation, clearly expecting me to fail.
Come on, old man, take the call. Acting all high and mighty with your lectures, but what now? Heh, hell talk, aren't you?
He jabbed my shoulder mockingly, his expensive suit crinkling with emotion. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to highlight every crease in his contemptuous expression. I'd finally had enough. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my back and met his gaze. Very well. The events that led to this confrontation began several months earlier, when I first made the decision to semi-retire. My name is Thomas Franklin, though most people call me Tom. This year, I retired at age 65, concluding what I thought would be the final chapter of my professional life. However, life had other plans. During my retirement farewells, the outpouring of appreciation from colleagues and business partners was overwhelming. Handshakes turned into heartfelt conversations, and what should have been a quick goodbyes became lengthy discussions about my continued involvement with the company. The recognition of my contributions touched me deeply. One evening, as I sat in our living room discussing these requests with my wife, Sarah, the setting sun cast a warm glow through our bay windows. Sarah sat in her favorite armchair, her silver hair catching the light as she studied my expression. "They really want you to stay on, don't they?" she asked, a knowing smile playing at her lips. I nodded, running my fingers along the rim of my coffee mug. "They've offered me a part-time position at Global Trade Partners. It's a major trading company I've worked for years." Sarah set down her book and leaned forward. "And what do you think about that?" "Honestly, I hadn't expected to find employment at 65, but..." I paused, choosing my words carefully. The thought of still being able to contribute, to pass on what I learned, it fills me with enthusiasm. "But?" Sarah prompted, knowing me too well. "But we made plans to travel together. Paris in the spring, remember? Walking along the Seine, visiting the cafes you always talked about." Sarah reached across and squeezed my hand. "Don't push yourself too hard, dear. You've always been such a workaholic." I chuckled, squeezing back. "Don't be silly. You're more important than any job." "Are you really sure about this? They offered you a full-time position too, didn't they?" "No, part-time is perfect," I said firmly. "I put in my share of hard work. Time to let the younger generation take the lead." I looked at her thoughtfully. "Besides, it's about time we had these adventures we've been postponing for 40 years. Sarah's eyes softened. She understood my work deeply. She'd been there through every late night, every international call, every challenge and triumph. She knew just how much I loved what I did. But she also knew that our last trip together had been our honeymoon, right after getting married. 4 decades of promises to travel together, to explore the world hand in hand, had been put on hold for my career. It was time to change that. During my interview with Global Trade Partners, I was direct about my needs. "I'd like to request part-time employment with flexible hours," I said, sitting across from Director Stevens in his office. His face broke into a broad smile. "Of course, that's absolutely fine. We're just thrilled to have you on board, Tom." He leaned forward, his enthusiasm evident. "Your reputation precedes you, and frankly, having some of your experience, even part-time, would be invaluable." The company readily agreed to my request, promising to accommodate my schedule whenever needed. They even seemed relieved that I was willing to work at all, which was both flattering and slightly amusing. My first day at the new workplace felt both familiar and strange. The office was modern, with open-plan seating and glass-walled conference rooms, quite different from where I'd spent most of my career. But the faces were familiar. Many employees recognized me from previous business dealings. "Tom, I can't believe it's really you!" exclaimed Janet from accounting, who I'd worked with on numerous international projects. "When they said you were joining us, I thought they were joking." Throughout the first week, I found myself learning new procedures and systems. The technology had changed significantly since I started my career, but I used my experience to compensate for my age as I picked up the new systems.
"Tom, you're picking up things so quickly. That's incredible,"
remarked David, a young IT specialist who'd been helping me learn the company's software. I chuckled, adjusting my reading glasses. "Well, I'm not as fast as I used to be. Age is definitely catching up with me."
"Don't be modest," David protested, grinning. "If you need any help, just let me know. I'm kind of pretty good at this myself."
Even though I was technically the junior employee in terms of company tenure, The staff who knew me from previous dealings treated me with friendly unfamiliarity. Some even came to me with questions, knowing my background in the industry. One afternoon, as I was reviewing some international shipping documents, Maria from the logistics department approached my desk. "Tom, could you look at this customs declaration? Something seems off, but I can't quite put my finger on it." I spent the next half hour walking her through the intricacies of international shipping regulations, drawing on decades of experience to help her understand not just what was wrong, but why it mattered. "Thank you so much," she exclaimed. "You explain things so clearly. No wonder everyone says you're the go-to person for international trade questions." These moments made this old man happy, knowing his experience could still be useful to others. As I drove home that evening, I found myself smiling. "Work is still as enjoyable as ever," I mused aloud. "I'm glad I could find a position in this industry again." The days fell into a pleasant rhythm. 3 days a week, I would come into the office, spending the other days with Sarah or planning our upcoming travels. We'd finally booked those tickets to Paris, and the anticipation of our spring journey added an extra spring to my step. I was thoroughly enjoying my new role on these fulfilling days. Little did I know that this comfortable routine was about to be dramatically disrupted by the arrival of a certain Harvard graduate. After about a month of settling into my new routine, the office was buzzing with anticipation. It was time for the new batch of trainees to complete their initial training and be assigned to the departments. Our department was scheduled to receive one new hire. I remember my own first day decades ago. The nervous energy, the desire to prove myself. Those memories brought a smile to my face as I straightened some papers on my desk. "Everyone gather around," called Director Stevens, his voice carrying across the office. "It's that time of year again when we welcome our new team member." The staff congregated in the center of the office, forming a loose semicircle. I noticed Maria from logistics shooting me an amused glance. She'd warned me that this year's batch of training was particularly interesting. "Everyone, please help them get settled in," Director Stevens continued, gently pushing forward a young man who looked like he stepped straight out of a luxury fashion magazine. The new hire wore what I recognized as a meticulously tailored suit, probably worth more than 2 months of my part-time salary. His shoes gleamed under the office lights, and his hair was styled with precision that suggested a lengthy morning routine. He stepped forward, adjusted his designer tie, and opened his mouth.
Ahem. Good morning, distinguished colleagues.
He began in what seemed to be an attempt at a British accent, though it sounded more like a parody than proper English. The words came out in such garbled mess that several of my colleagues exchanged bewildered glances. After a moment of awkward silence, the young man seemed to realize his audience wasn't following. He cleared his throat again.
Oh, terribly sorry about that. I've been at Harvard so long, it just comes naturally. Let me start over properly.
His accent suddenly shifted to standard American.
I'm William Parker. Pleased to meet you all.
The new hire, Will, gave a slight bow, though it looked more like a theatrical gesture than a genuine greeting. Despite our collective confusion, everyone applauded politely. Will's face lit up at the applause, clearly misinterpreting our surprised reactions as admiration. His self-satisfied smile grew wider as he continued.
Sorry about that little linguistic mishap.
He chuckled, straightening his already perfectly straight tie.
Sometimes I just naturally slip into English. You see, at Harvard.
What followed was perhaps the longest self-introduction I'd ever witnessed in my 40-plus years of business. For nearly 5 minutes, Will regaled us with tales of his Harvard experiences, managing to mention his alma mater at least 12 times. He sprinkled in frequent references to his supposed English expertise, though I noticed our British colleague Howard wincing slightly at Will's pronunciation.
And then, during my final year at Harvard, I led a study group that...
Director Stevens, probably sensing the growing restlessness in the room, finally stepped in. We should probably get back to work now. That's enough introduction for now. Welcome aboard, Will.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Will responded with his brightest smile yet, though I noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. As everyone dispersed back to their desk, I overheard snippets of conversation. Did he really need to mention Harvard that many times? I could barely understand his English. Is he going to be like this every day? I silently hoped the young man's enthusiasm would eventually find a more productive channel. After all, confidence wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It just needed to be tempered with humility and real-world experience. That hope began to fade as the days went by. Will quickly became the main topic of conversation in our department, though not for the reasons he probably would have liked. Every morning he would make his rounds through the office, attempting to communicate in what he claimed was English but sounded more like a confused mixture of various accents he probably heard in movies. While his provocative attitude might have been admirable in theory, people found themselves having to stop their work constantly to deal with his interruptions. I watched my colleagues develop various strategies for handling these daily disruptions. Janet would suddenly become very interested in her computer screen, Howard would mysteriously need to make an urgent phone call, and Maria would pretend to be deep in conversation with someone on her headset. As we worked together, it became increasingly apparent that Will's supposedly excellent English was actually quite difficult to understand, even for native speakers. During a video call of our London office, I noticed the British team repeatedly asking him to repeat himself, their polite requests barely masking their growing frustrations.
You see, at Harvard, I only communicate in English, so sometimes I can't help myself.
Will would declare proudly after each awkward interaction, seemingly oblivious to the communication breakdowns he was causing. However, given how much he bragged about his English skills and his Harvard credentials, no one felt comfortable pointing out the obvious issues. Everyone just nodded along when they couldn't understand him, trying to keep the conversation moving and get back to their work. Then came the day Will finally made his way to my desk. Will approached my desk one morning, his designer shoes clicking against the polished floor. He launched into what I assumed was meant to be a greeting, though the words came out in such a jumbled mix of accents that I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I tilted my head, trying my best to decipher his unclear pronunciation. The morning sun streaming through the office windows caught his Harvard class ring as he gestured dramatically.
I was asking.
He started again, then switched to English with the same unclear pronunciation and unnatural rhythm.
I said I was asking.
I caught the word school somewhere in his theatrical delivery, but couldn't make out anything else. Hoping to move the conversation forward productively, I made what I thought was a polite request. Would you mind switching to Japanese? That's what we mainly use here. I tried to smile warmly, but Will's reaction was immediate. His face darkened and he clicked his tongue in disgust.
What, you don't understand English?
He scoffed, his voice dripping with condensation.
Why is someone who can't even speak English working at this company? This is an international business, you know.
We were alone in that part of the office. Most of our colleagues were in their morning meetings. Perhaps knowing this, Will grew bolder. He jabbed my shoulder with his fingers, his class ring leaving a small mark on my pressed shirt.
I'm asking you where you went to college, old-timer. Even state schools teach English these days, right?
I strained some papers on my desk, maintaining my composure. Actually, I never finished high school. Will's eyes widened comically.
What? A dropout? Are you kidding me?
He started laughing so hard that tears formed in the corner of his eyes.
Oh man, are they really that desperate for workers? Hiring a dropout can't even speak English?
He paused for dramatic effect, then snapped his fingers as if he was struck by a revelation.
Wait, I get it. You must be the janitor, right? That explains everything.
Still laughing, Will walked past me as if I were nothing more than an amusing piece of furniture. As he passed, I caught a whiff of what must have been extremely expensive cologne. From that day on, Will's attitude toward me changed completely. What had been a mere arrogance transformed into active disdain. He would gather with other new hires in the break room, speaking just loudly enough for his voice to carry to my desk.
Can you believe they hired a dropout? In this economy, they should be able to find a better candidate.
When passing my desk, he would mutter something in his version of English. While I couldn't understand exactly what he was saying, his tone made it clear he was mocking me. The situation escalated further when he discovered I was part-time. I overheard him in the copy room one day speaking to another trainee.
Part-time? Ah, that makes sense. They probably just felt sorry for him. You know how it is. Companies need to show they're socially conscious these days. Hiring seniors, dropouts, it's all for show.
Having worked until retirement age, I'd encountered many people like Will during my career. I'd seen countless young graduates enter the business world, some with attitudes remarkably similar to his. Most eventually learned valuable lessons about humility and respect, though usually through much gentler means than what fate had in store for Will. One evening, as I was sharing the day's events with Sarah over dinner, she noticed my preoccupation. Is everything all right, dear? You barely touched your miso soup. I looked up from my bowl, meeting her concerned gaze. Oh, it's nothing serious. Just a challenging situation at work. Sarah raised an eyebrow. The Harvard graduate? I couldn't help but chuckle. Is it that obvious? She reached across the table and patted my hand. Tom, I've been married to you for 40 years. I know when something's bothering you. Want to talk about it? I sighed, setting down my chopsticks. He's talented, Sarah. Under all that arrogance, I can see real potential. But his attitude, not just affecting me, it's disrupting the whole office. And knowing you, you're trying to figure out how to help him grow without crushing his spirit. I nodded. He'll probably move on to something else once he gets bored, as long as it doesn't affect the work. Sarah's eyes twinkled with knowing wisdom. Just remember what you always say. Sometimes the best lessons come from experience, not lectures. Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. The very next day, everything would come to a head in a way none of us could have anticipated. A few days later, Director Stevens called me into his office. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as he shuffled through some papers. "Tom," he began, his tone serious, "I have something I'd like you to look at. Could you review this?" He handed me a stack of documents concerning a contract of ST Corporation, a major multinational company headquartered in New York. My eyes widened slightly as I scanned the first page. ST Corporation was a global enterprise with office across every continent, known for their innovative approach to international trade. "Of all their international operations, you're usually the best person for this project," Director Stevens continued, leaning back in his chair. I adjusted my reading glasses. "Are you sure you want to trust something to this important to a part-timer?" The director laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, Tom. Stop being so modest. We trust you completely. Oh, Will!" His eyes caught something over my shoulder. "Hey, Will!" I turned to see Will striding towards us, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. As usual, his suit was impeccable, but his expression soured slightly when he saw me. The change was subtle. Anyone who hadn't spent decades reading people in business negotiations might have missed it.
Yes, Director?
Will's voice was perfectly polite, but I noticed his hands tighten slightly at his sides. "Will, you're good with English, right? I want you to assist Tom here. Watch how he works. It'll be a great learning experience." Will's carefully maintained facade cracked for just a moment.
What? You want me to assist him? As his assistant?
"Yes, you might be handling projects like this yourself someday." The director's tone was cheerful, seemingly oblivious to Will's displeasure.
Well, if you say so.
Will's voice was strained, like someone trying to swallow something particularly bitter. "Great! I'm counting on you both!" Director Stevens walked away, whistling cheerfully, leaving Will and me alone in awkward silence. I went to make copies of the documents at the printer, feeling Will's glare on my back. Behind me, I could hear him muttering under his breath.
Why do I have to? Why with this old man?
His complaints made me sigh heavily. I'd hoped we could move past this, but it seemed we needed to clear the air first. I turned to face him directly. "Like it or not, this is work," I said firmly. "I'm counting on you. As the director said, you might be handling this kind of project yourself soon, so pay attention." I handed him the copied documents. "We'll start with a meeting. I'll go book a conference room. Wait here." Will looked thoroughly disgruntled, his jaw clenched tight. He didn't respond, but I handed him the copied documents anyway, and went to reserve a conference room. While arranging the room, I remembered Sarah's words about lessons coming from experience. Perhaps this project would provide exactly with that kind of learning opportunity. After setting up the conference room, I headed to the archive room to find some additional reference materials. ST Corporation had a complex corporate structure, and I wanted to ensure that we had all the necessary background information. When I returned to our department, I found Will had already left for the conference room. Maria caught my eye as I gathered my laptop. "Good luck," she mouthed silently, her expression sympathetic. I nodded my thanks and headed to the conference room. Even before I opened the door, I could hear Will's agitated movement inside.
You sure took your sweet time. I've been waiting forever.
As soon as I opened the door, Will's complaint hit me like a physical force. His attitude was completely different from when the director was present. Gone was any pretense of politeness. Will's behavior irritated me. I reminded myself that he was young. He probably had various complaints about working with someone like me. I've been in this industry long enough to know that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most challenging situations. I opened my laptop and showed Will the additional documents I gathered. The afternoon sun streaming through the conference room windows highlighted the dust notes dancing in the air between us. "I was looking for more background materials," I explained, keeping my voice level. "This is a major corporation. Their approach might be different from what we're used to, so we need as much information as possible. Thorough research is crucial in international business." I extended the documents towards Will. "Review these 3 sets carefully." Will snatched the documents roughly from my hands, nearly tearing them in the process. His expensive watch caught the light as he jerked his arm back.
Why do I have to assist some old man?
He muttered loud enough to ensure I heard every word.
You can't even speak English. Hey, do you even know how to use that computer? Want me to show you where the power button is?
"I can manage, thank you," I replied quietly, clenching my fist under the table to control my rising anger. I tried to stay calm and control my rising anger, focusing on the task at hand. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the conference room table as we worked. The tension in the air almost palpable. Couldn't be helped, I told myself. He was young. Of course he would rebel and make mistakes. Through my decades of experience, I'd observed that even the most difficult employees usually took their work seriously when it really mattered. I had noticed that despite his attitude, Will typically approached his actual task with dedication. If he could complete this major project properly, I could overlook his personal attacks. Besides, I reminded myself, I wasn't here to win a popularity contest. I was here to ensure the success of an important international negotiation. After Will finished reading through the materials, we started discussing how to proceed. The conference room felt smaller as we debated each point, the afternoon dragging on as we struggled to find common ground. Looking at the historical data, I began, pointing to a chart on my laptop screen. This company's strength lies in their supply chain integration, and they're currently interested in expanding their Asian market presence. So if we approach it this way...
No, this would be way better.
Will interrupted, pushing my hand aside to gesture to a different section.
If I were handling it, I'd...
But that approach would cause problems with their European subsidiaries, I countered, pulling up another document to support my point. Will scoffed, leaning back in his chair.
Those problems won't materialize for at least a year. Besides, our potential losses would be minimal.
What are you talking about? I struggled to keep my voice even. Even if our losses are small, it would cause significant disruption to their international operations. That's why we should...
Huh? That's stupid.
Will's voice rose sharply.
That would just reduce our profit margins. Way too much hassle.
Our discussion continued. Will consistently opposed every suggestion I made. The afternoon light faded to evening, and we still made no progress. Throughout our entire discussion, he never once nodded in agreement or showed any sign of considering my input. I stayed calm, thinking he must have alternative ideas, and tried to hear him out. But as I analyzed each of his proposals, I found obvious flaws that would doom any long-term partnership. Time kept passing without any progress. The office outside had grown quiet, most of our colleagues having gone home for the day. Frustrated by the lack of headway, Will's voice grew increasingly hostile as he dealt with my resistance.
This plan is ridiculous!
He finally exploded, slamming his hand on the table.
Everything a dropout like you comes up with is useless. You're just too stupid to understand modern business, old man.
I'm still your senior colleague, I reminded him firmly. Watch your language during business discussions. Will let out a harsh laugh.
Ha! You're just a part-timer. Does a part-timer even count as a senior? I'm a full-time executive trainee, you know.
That doesn't matter right now. Work is work. Do it properly.
Yeah, whatever,
he muttered, turning to his laptop. We started documenting our agreed-upon points and preparing materials for the director. When we reached the section about international communications, Will arbitrarily entered his own name as a primary contact.
You can't speak English, right?
He said with a smirk.
Leave it to me. Unlike some dropout, I have real international experience.
He typed away with renewed energy, clearly pleased with himself. To my growing alarm, he began entering undecided details without consulting me, making arbitrary decisions about crucial aspects of the negotiation. That was the last straw. The weight of 4 years of experience and the potential consequences of his actions pressed upon me. Enough! I shouted, my voice echoing off the conference room walls. This isn't some college project. This is serious business. Will flinched for a moment at my outburst, but quickly recovered. He stood up, using his height advantage to look down at me from across the table.
You're the one who needs to get real, he sneered. A dropout who can't even speak English shouldn't be handling international business. It's pathetic how the director keeps deferring to you because of your age. A dropout like you should be organizing files in the storage room or something.
His laughter echoed through the empty office as he continued his tirade. The sound made me rise from my chair as well, years of accumulated wisdom and dignity straightening my spine. I am still your senior colleague, I said, my voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. Is this how a professional behaves? Is this how a decent human being treats their coworker? My raised voice seemed to catch Will off guard. He took half a step back, clearly shocked to see me, usually so calm, showing such emotion. But I wasn't finished. I pointed at the document spread across the table, my hand steady despite my anger. You haven't even properly reviewed the materials. You know nothing about their corporate structure. You haven't even tried to research or ask questions. Understanding your business partner is absolutely fundamental. Didn't Harvard teach you even the basics of international business? As my words hit home, Will's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. He slammed his laptop shut with enough force to make me wince for the expensive device's safety. Taking only his computer, he stormed toward the conference room door.
If you're gonna be like that, just do all the grunt work yourself.
he shouted over his shoulder.
Just a part-timer trying to act important.
Wait right there! I called after him, but Will had already disappeared through the door, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. After watching him vanish, I came back to my senses. The silence of the empty office pressed in around me as I sat alone in the now quiet conference room, trying to collect my thoughts. The evening lights of the city twinkled outside the window, reminding me of how late it had gotten. I gathered the scattered documents, my mind replaying our heated exchange. Perhaps I had been too harsh. Maybe there had been a better way to handle the situation. Sarah's words about teaching through experience echoed in my thoughts, though this probably wasn't what she had in mind. The next morning, I arrived at work with a slight sense of dread. The weight of yesterday's confrontation sat heavy in my stomach as I rode the elevator to our floor. To my surprise, Will immediately approached my desk, wearing what appeared to be an even more expensive suit than usual. His face bore a smug expression that instantly put me on guard.
Good morning, Mr. Franklin,
he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. He's already reset his attitude? I thought to myself. Well, that's impressive. Maybe he's more mature than I thought. Impressed by Will's apparent quick recovery, I returned his greeting cheerfully. Ah, good morning, Will. About yesterday. Before I could finish my attempt at reconciliation, Will interrupted me and thrust the document into my hands. His smirk widened as I accepted it with a puzzled look.
I've already completed everything,
he announced proudly.
Unlike a part-timer, we full-time employees work efficiently.
What is this? I murmured, scanning the pages with growing concern.
The financial proposal we were discussing yesterday. Don't tell me your memory's going already.
It was indeed related to what we had been discussing, even during our argument. I began checking the documents, but something felt seriously wrong about the amounts listed. 1, 2, 3. I counted under my breath, double and triple checking the figures. Watching me checking desperately, Will doubled over laughing.
Are you actually looking for mistaken documents prepared by a Harvard graduate? There's no way I make mistakes. Besides, I've already sent it all to their offices.
My blood ran cold. You've already sent it?
Of course,
Will proclaimed proudly.
That's how efficiency works, old-timer.
I was shocked into silence by Will's words. Despite my resolution not to raise my voice after yesterday, I couldn't help but shout again. Listen, these numbers are completely wrong! My voice shook as I processed the implications. This could cause our company $1 billion loss!
What?
Will's smug expression faltered for the first time. My voice echoed through the department, causing several heads to turn our way. Just as we both froze in this tableau of horror, another sound cut through the air. Beep! The intercom's cheerful tone felt almost mocking the tense atmosphere. I quickly pressed the button to answer, trying to keep my voice steady. This is Tom Franklin from International Trade. Oh, hello? Is Mr. Parker available? We have a call from ST Corporation's French office. The receptionist's voice was pleasant, unaware of the crisis unfolding in our department. It was a call for Will. Will grabbed the phone from my hand and asked to be connected, his earlier confidence already showing cracks on around the edges. The line connected to the French office. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I watched Will nervously, my heart pounding with each passing second.
Hello?
Will spoke in English, his voice wavering slightly. He seemed to repeat the same phrases several times before awkwardly switching to what I assumed was meant to be French, though it sounded more like a mangled mix of various Romance languages. Apparently, the other party couldn't understand his English, or his attempt at French. As I watched Will on the phone with growing concern, I heard angry shouting from the other end, before the light went dead with a sharp click. Will set down the phone in a daze, his hand trembling slightly. The morning sunlight streaming through the office windows seemed to highlight every bead of sweat on his forehead. I gently patted his shoulder, trying to assess the damage. What did they say? The moment I asked, Will's face contorted with rage, and he violently swatted my hand away. His expensive watch caught the light as he made the gesture. Final flash of pride before reality came crashing down.
This is your fault, old man!
He shouted, his voice cracking.
If you had just finalized everything and sent the documents yesterday!
I took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of our colleagues on us. The office had gone eerily quiet, everyone pretending to work while clearly listening to every word. However, this time I maintained my composure. Years of handling international crises had taught me that panic only made things worse. Don't blame others, I said firmly. Your unauthorized actions caused this. Now tell me what they said.
Shut up! I'm trying to think!
His hands were shaking as he loosened his designer tie. The perfect facade was crumbling rapidly. You couldn't understand them? I pressed gently.
Shut up!
Will's voice had taken on a desperate edge.
I only took elementary French, but I understood some words.
I tried to calm the panicking Will by placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. His expensive suit felt damp with nervous sweat beneath my palm. Take it easy, I said softly. Next time we get a call, make sure to take notes. If you don't understand something, it has to call to me. In international business, it's important to admit when you don't understand.
Then why don't you handle it, old man?
Will interrupted me mid-sentence, shrugging off my hand. His voice had taken on an hysterical edge as he jabbed a finger in my direction.
Don't lecture me, you dropout. If you're so smart, prove it.
He pointed at the phone and laughed mockingly, though the sound held more fear than humor now.
Here's your chance. Try calling them yourself. Since you're so eager to lecture me, you must be pretty competent, right, you high school dropout? But oh wait, they only speak French.
Will's words grew increasingly hostile as he jabbed my shoulder again, harder this time. His designer cufflinks glinted in the morning light as he gestured wildly.
Come on, old man, make the call. Acting all high and mighty earlier, but what now? All talk and no action, right?
Will's face twisted in what he probably thought was a cruel smile, but it looked more like a grimace of barely contained panic. I glanced at my watch. This wasn't getting us anywhere. We had a crisis to handle, and time was of the essence. No other choice, I pressed the phone buttons, each digit feeling heavier than the last. Ring, ring. The sound seemed to echo through the silent office. I could feel every eye on me, including Will's, which had taken on a slightly manic gleam. Bonjour, ST Corporation French office. A crisp female voice answered, her tone professional, but with an edge that suggested she was still annoyed from the previous call. Bonjour, this is Global Trade Partners. I'd like to speak with the person in charge. I responded in fluent French, my accent perfect after years of practice. Ah, yes, one moment, please. The receptionist's voice immediately warmed upon hearing proper French. I glanced at Will while waiting to be connected. His eyes were wide, and his mouth hung open in shock. He was clearly stunned that I could speak French. Hello? We can't continue this discussion. Your previous representative's French was incomprehensible. I sincerely apologize for earlier. I interrupted smoothly in French. This is Tom Franklin speaking. Ah, finally someone who could communicate. The relief in the man's voice was palpable. Thank goodness. I called urgently because I had serious concerns about the proposal sent this morning. I carefully explained the errors in the documentation, my French flowing smoothly as I detailed the correct figures. Years of international negotiations had taught me the importance of being both precise and diplomatic in such situations. Je vous prie d'accepter nos excuses les plus sincères, I said, apologizing profusely for the confusion. We prepare and send the corrected documents immediately. The relief in my counterpart's voice was evident. Fortunately, they were still in the review stage and hadn't finalized the amounts. After expressing my gratitude for their understanding, I ended the call for traditional French farewell. Phew, good thing we caught it in time, I muttered, wiping my brow. Then I turned to face Will directly, whose complexion had taken on an interesting shade of pale. They said they couldn't understand what you were saying in French. I explained gently, trying not to rub salt in the wound.
Just because you can speak French doesn't mean...
Will started to speak, but his attempt at bravado was interrupted by another urgent beep from the intercom. Will jumped as if he had been shocked, his perfectly polished shoes squeaking against the floor. Beep! Excuse me! The receptionist's voice held a note of panic. We're getting multiple calls! ST Corporation's Chinese office, Italian office, Spanish office, and... Looking at Will, I saw his face had turned from pale to ashen. The realization seemed to hit him all at once. He had sent the incorrect documents to every international office, and he couldn't speak any of their languages. I quickly picked up the phone and asked for the calls to be connected one at a time. There was no time for gloating or lessons. We need to contain this crisis immediately. Wei, ni hao. I began in fluent Mandarin as soon as the first call connected. This is Tom Franklin speaking. Will's jaw dropped even further as he watched me switch effortlessly between languages. I noticed his reaction from the corner of my eye, but couldn't spare any attention for it now. Calls kept coming, and I handled each one in turn. Pronto sono Tom Franklin. I explained the situation in Italian. Buenos dias, habla Tom Franklin. I clarified the error in Spanish. With each language switch, I could see Will's Harvard education worldview crumbling a little more. He collapsed into a nearby chair, his expensive suit wrinkled and his carefully styled hair now disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. After the final call, I let out a deep sigh and sat down quickly to transfer my handwritten notes to a notebook. The morning had turned into an early afternoon, and I needed to contact various departments before I forgot any important details. "Will," I said, looking up from my notes, "could you please revise the documents you created with the correct amounts? Let's get these modified and sent to each office right away."
Yes.
His voice was barely above a whisper, far cry from his usual confident tone. Noticing his lifeless response, I finally took a proper look at Will. His defeated expression showed both his awareness of his mistake and his frustration at being so thoroughly shown up. While typing on his computer, Will asked without looking at me, his voice small and uncertain.
How many languages do you speak?"
"About 10, I replied casually, organizing my notes. Some of the contacts I dealt with at my previous company were very understanding when I explained our situation. The calls went smoothly. Looks like everything will work out. You really dodged a bullet there."
But with English I could...
Will hurried to defend himself, though his voice lacked his usual conviction. Seeing that this kid still hadn't fully grasped the lesson, I casually mentioned something I heard during one of my calls. "Mike from our New York office said you're quite a handful. Said you work fast but make too many mistakes. He mentioned it's troublesome when someone can speak English but can't handle the actual work properly."
What?
Will's voice cracked on the word. "Also, your English is really hard to understand," I continued, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "I couldn't follow it, but Mike said sometimes he couldn't understand what you were saying either. He's going to ask the director to make me the primary contact until you can speak more clearly." Great, giving me more work. When I looked at Will after speaking, his face showed a look of complete betrayal. His carefully constructed image of himself as a sophisticated international professional had been shattered in the span of a single morning. Probably no one had ever pointed these things out to him before. His prestigious education and family background had likely sheltered him from such direct feedback. I paused from my work for a moment and turned to face Will directly. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his dejected figure. For the first time, I saw not the arrogant Harvard graduate, but a young man struggling with his first real failure. "Languages are just tools for communication. What matters is heart," I said gently. "Being able to communicate is the bare minimum in our field. What's the point of showing off? You didn't graduate from Harvard just because you could speak English, right? You studied hard and learned to do things just beyond using English, didn't you?" I patted the dejected Will's back encouragingly, remembering my earlier struggles in the business world. I've made plenty of mistakes too. Being a dropout, I got looked down on countless times. But you know what? I haven't been looked down on continually all these years. Through effort, I overcame those challenges to get where I am today. Will's shoulders tensed under my hand, but he didn't pull away this time. "Well, you're still young. It's okay to make mistakes. Just don't make the same mistake twice." The arrogant Will who had been shouting earlier was gone. In his place sat someone who seemed smaller somehow, despite his expensive suit and carefully crafted appearance. He hung his head dejectedly, seemingly processing everything I said. Then he quietly nodded at my words, a simple gesture that carried more sincerity than any of his previous theatrical movements. Seeing this, I turned back to my desk, giving him space to compose himself. "Alright, let's get back to work. Don't worry, we're handling it. Let's keep going after we make these corrections."
"Okay."
Will responded quietly, his voice lacking its usual artificial polish. After this brief exchange, we continued working smoothly without any more arguments for the rest of the day. The office slowly emptied as evening approached, but we stayed focused on our task, determined to fix the morning's mistakes. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow through the office windows, we finally finished the last of the corrected documents. Will had worked diligently, double-checking every figure and asking questions when he wasn't sure about something. A marked change from his previous behavior. Just as we were preparing to send the final corrections, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Director Stevens.
"Both of you, CEO's office now."
Will's face, which had regained some coloring during our afternoon of focused work, turned pale again. We both knew what this meant. It was time to face the consequences of this morning's mishap. The walk to the CEO's office felt like the longest journey of my life, and I could tell Will felt the same. The usual bustling office had grown quiet, only the soft hum of the air conditioning and our footsteps breaking the silence. We both nervously knocked on the imposing oak door in front of us. The brass nameplate reading CEO Robert Matthews gleamed under the hallway lights, seeming to mock our apprehension.
"Come in."
The voice from a man was stern and clipped. "Tom Franklin and Will Parker, sir," I announced as professionally as possible.
Come in."
"Excuse us," I said.
"Excuse me."
Will's voice was barely above a whisper. We opened the CEO's door together. The corner office was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. But neither of us was in any state to appreciate the view. CEO Matthew sat behind his massive desk, his expression thunderous, the setting sun casting long shadows across his face, making him look even more intimidating. Of course he was angry. This was about the day's near-catastrophic mistake. We had informed him immediately when we discovered the issue. Now it was time to face the full consequences.
What were you thinking?
The CEO's voice boomed through the office. Will, still standing, bore the brunt of the CEO's anger. Earlier he had been pale, but now facing the CEO, Will was as white as a ghost. His perfectly tailored suit seemed to hang more loosely on his frame, as if he had physically shrunk under the weight of his superior's disappointment. The CEO continued his reprimand, each word hitting like a physical blow.
Do you understand the magnitude of what could have happened? The potential damage to our relationship with XT Corporation? The financial implications?
Will was making fists of his hands at his sides, trying desperately to hold back tears. I could see him trembling slightly, probably imagining worst-case scenarios about his career. The Harvard graduate who had been so proud and confident this morning now looked like a scared schoolboy. I couldn't watch anymore. I stood beside Will and bowed deeply to the CEO. The CEO stopped mid-sentence, surprised by my intervention. "Mr. Matthews, I sincerely apologize," I said, my voice firm despite my bow. Will's hasty actions were partly my fault as well. My guidance was inefficient. We'd be more diligent in our work from now on. I bowed repeatedly, taking partial responsibility. After all, I was a senior employee who had been assigned to mentor him. His mistake was, in some way, a reflection of my failure to guide him properly. Seeing this, the CEO's expression softened slightly. He sighed deeply as he sat back in his leather chair, the tension in the room shifting.
For Tom's sake, I'll let this slide this time.
He fixed his gaze on Will.
However, Will, be prepared for some serious consequences if you make a similar mistake again.
Will raised his head to look at the CEO, his eyes wide with disbelief at this unexpected mercy. The CEO nodded firmly, his message clear. This was a second chance, not a pardon.
Thank you so much!
Will's voice cracked with emotion.
I'll be extremely careful not to make any mistake in the future. Thank you!
Thank Tom, not me.
The CEO replied, gesturing towards me.
Now, you both must be tired. Go home and come back ready to work hard tomorrow.
Yes, thank you for today, I said quietly.
Thank you, sir!
Will's voice was stronger now, filled with genuine gratitude rather than his usual artificial polish. We bowed again and quietly left the CEO's office. The moment the door closed behind us, Will turned and bowed deeply to me, bending in a perfect 90-degree angle.
Mr. Franklin, thank you! Thank you so much!
Will's voice trembled with sincerity, a far cry from his usual affected tone. His attitude was completely different from before. It was as if the events of the day had stripped away layers of pretense, revealing the person beneath the polished exterior. Will straightened up with determination in his eyes and bowed respectfully again.
Mr. Franklin, please let me learn from you. I want to observe and learn from you as much as possible during this project. Please teach me. I'm asking sincerely.
His words made me feel both appreciated and slightly embarrassed. I scratched my cheek, unsure how to handle such earnest respect from someone who had been mocking me just hours ago. Just make sure you watch and learn properly, I said, trying to sound gruff but probably failing.
Yes, sir!
Will's response was immediate and genuine. This incident marked a complete turning point in Will's attitude. Over the next few weeks, he became almost unrecognizable, and I mean that in the best possible way. His boasting had stopped completely. Instead of trying to impress everyone with his Harvard credentials, he began listening carefully to others, often taking notes during conversations with more experienced colleagues. One morning, I overheard him talking with Maria from logistics.
Could you explain more about how you handled the customs documentation?
He asked, notebook in hand.
I realize I don't fully understand the process.
Maria looked startled for a moment, probably remembering how he used to interrupt her at work with unsolicited English conversation. But she smiled warmly and began explaining the procedures. Whenever problems arose, Will would immediately seek advice instead of trying to handle everything alone. His questions were thoughtful and showed a genuine desire to learn.
Mr. Franklin,
he asked one afternoon as we reviewed some contracts.
I noticed you always check the subsidiary relations before finalizing any agreements. Could you teach me more about why that's important?
The major project continued without any more mistakes, though now without challenges. But now, instead of rushing ahead blindly, Will approached each obstacle with careful consideration and a willingness to learn. Working closely with him, I discovered that, due to his Harvard education, he had an exceptionally sharp mind. Once he set aside his arrogance and focused on learning, his true capabilities began to shine. He had a great capacity for learning and could apply what he learned effectively. When I explained complex international trade concepts, he grasped them quickly and found innovative ways to apply them to our work. He was, without a doubt, an incredibly talented individual. The problem had never been his abilities, only his attitude. And regarding his English, when I pointed out areas for improvement, he worked diligently to correct them. He spent hours practicing with native speakers in our office, humbly accepting their feedback and corrections.
I realized I was trying so hard to sound sophisticated that I wasn't actually communicating effectively,
He admitted one day during lunch.
It's ironic. And I was so focused on proving I could speak English that I forgot the whole point of language is to connect with others.
While it's difficult to change ingrained language habits, he practiced constantly. I often saw him arriving early to have English conversations with our international colleagues, focusing on clarity rather than showing off. When we had Mike from the New York office test Will's English on a video call, Mike was amazed at the improvement.
Well, is that really you?
Mike laughed in genuine surprise.
Your English is so much clearer now. What happened?
Will glanced at me before responding with a humble smile.
I had some good teachers who helped me understand what real communication means.
Mike gave Will his full endorsement, saying he could definitely be trusted with client communications now.
Whatever you're doing, keep it up,
He added.
This is exactly what we need in international business.
As a result of Will's transformation, my workload gradually decreased, and I can now take time off whenever I want. Sarah and I finally took that trip to Paris we've been planning. Though, and not before, Will insisted on practicing French conversation with me for a few weeks. Your accent is actually pretty good when you're not trying to force it, I told him during one of our practice sessions. He laughed sheepishly.
Amazing how much better you sound when you're actually trying to communicate instead of impress, isn't it?
These days, I enjoy traveling abroad with my wife while still maintaining my part-time work schedule. We've explored the streets of Paris, visited temples in Kyoto, and wandered through markets in Shanghai. All those dreams we put on hold for so many years are finally becoming reality. Everyone makes mistakes. There's no such thing as someone who never fails. What matters is what you do after failing. I was reminded of this truth recently when Sarah and I returned from our trip to Italy. Walking into the office on my first day back, I found Will conducting a training session for new hires.
Remember,
He was saying, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of earned experience.
in international business, your credentials don't matter nearly as much as your ability to connect with people. I learned that lesson the hard way.
He caught my eye and smiled warmly.
Actually, speaking of important lessons, here's someone who taught me one of the most valuable ones in my career.
The new employees turned to look at me, and I could see the genuine respect in Will's eyes as he introduced me. It was a far cry from the disdain he'd shown during his own first days. Later that afternoon, Will stopped by my desk.
How was Italy, Mr. Franklin?
Wonderful, I replied, pulling up some photos on my computer. Sarah and I spent a week in Florence. The architecture was breathtaking,
Your Italian must have come in handy.
he said, then chuckled.
You know, I still can't believe how many languages you speak. I was so arrogant back then, thinking my broken French made me international.
Well, you've certainly come a long way since then. And he had. Just last week, I overheard him mentoring a junior employee who was struggling with confidence issues.
Don't feel failure,
He told them, echoing words I once shared with him.
learn from it and try again. It's more important to fix mistakes than to hide them.
It's funny how life works sometimes. At 65, when most people thought I was finished with my career, I ended up learning one of my most important lessons about teaching and growth. Working with Will reminded me that it's never too late to learn or to teach. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the greatest lessons come when we least expect them, and teaching others can teach us something too. Will's transformation reminded me that it's never too late to grow, whether you're a fresh Harvard graduate or a 65-year-old veteran like me. Today, when I see Will confidently handling the international calls and mentoring newer employees with humility and patience, I can't help but smile. We still work together on major projects, but now as a true colleague who respects each other's strengths and learns from each other's experiences. Just yesterday, he helped me navigate a new digital platform the company had implemented.
See, Mr. Franklin?
He said with a grin.
Now it's my turn to teach you something.
As for me, I continue to balance my work with traveling the world with Sarah. Sometimes we even visit the countries where I conduct business. It turns out retirement doesn't have to mean stopping everything you love. It just means finding a better balance. Sarah often teases me about being unable to fully retire. You just can't help teaching, can you? She said recently over dinner. I suppose not, I admitted. But you know what? I think I'm learning just as much as I am teaching. And that's perhaps the most important lesson of all. That growth and learning never stops, no matter your age or experience. Whether you're a young graduate taking your first steps in the business world, or a seasoned professional nearing retirement, there's always something new to learn and someone new to learn from. Will taught me that, though he probably doesn't realize it. And I suspect that as long as there are people willing to learn and grow, they'll never truly retire. After all, every interaction is a chance to teach, to learn, and to grow together. That's the real secret to success in business and in life.